I'd like to welcome up and start our first panel, which is titled, Does the Voice of the Church Still Matter? So let me welcome up Reverend Bill Owens and Pastor Danny Forshee to the stage. And as they take a seat, I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. Reverend Bill Owens is the president of the Coalition of African American Pastors, an organization dedicated to promoting and supporting Christ-centered values. Coalition of African American Pastors first gained notoriety as the black pastors group that was willing to call out President Obama for his views on issues that people in the black community cared about regarding same-sex marriage. In addition to speaking as an advocate for his faith in relation to education, life, and religious expression, Reverend Owens served as a consultant to many political campaigns, candidates, and organizations. Reverend Owens is married to Deborah Owens and is a proud father of 8 children, grandfather of 13 grandchildren. I know 2 of the children are here. Very cute children here. Wave to the crowd. You have your moment. They were charming me earlier. Pastor Danny Forshee, as you've heard a little bit about already, is the lead pastor here at Great Hills Baptist Church. He began his ministry at Great Hills Baptist Church in 2010. He's got a passion for sharing Christ with the unchurched and preaching the scriptures. He is also on the chairman of the executive board of the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention. Give another round of applause for Pastor Danny Forshee. So, gentlemen, we came up with this title of this topic, Does the Voice of the Church Still Matter? And it wasn't just to grab people's attention. I'm sure sometimes even those of us of Christian faith have that thought when we look at some of the attacks on our biblical values. We look at the attacks on churches themselves as buildings. And so we're not trying to question the power of God and whether it matters, but we thought it's something that we think about sometimes, or that people think about and wonder. But it also is an opportunity for us to talk about the answer to that question that you and I and others probably in church leadership experience every day, is that absolutely the voice of the church matters. But a lot of that goes back to where ministry started. Is your microphone working? So, Pastor Forshee, tell us a little bit about how you got involved in church leadership and why you're involved in public policy as a pastor.
Okay, Jonathan, thank you. And again, just welcome you guys. Glad you are here. Glad you're on our church campus, and delighted to have you see some familiar faces and good friends out there. And my wife is getting off work to come join us as well. I hope we'll give her a seat. Would that be okay if we get her a seat in here?
I see one right here on the front row.
Good deal.
That we can work her into. Yes.
So I became a follower of Christ really when I was in college. I was raised in a quasi-Christian home with a godly mom and a dad that really didn't know the Lord. And so when they divorced, our world was pretty shattered with 4 boys in the family, and we all migrated, went with our mom. And so that began our journey. And so really in high school, people started investing in us, inviting us to church. And really it wasn't until college that I accepted Christ as my Savior and Lord and committed my life to Him, and knew the destiny of my life was to serve Him vocationally. And I didn't really know what that meant. I felt like it may be a pastor, maybe an evangelist or whatever. And so that's the genesis of my life and movement. I met the Lord and I met my wife the next year, and we've been married 33 years. And so that's how I got into ministry. And I went to school, went to Southwestern Seminary, got my degrees, and then started teaching at one of our Southern Baptist seminaries, and then pastoring churches in different places in the country, and have landed here in Austin. And this is our home. This is where God has us. And if I were to try to leave, I don't think my wife would go with me. I think she loves it so much, and just as a joke, she absolutely loves being here, and I do too. And so that's just kind of our journey, how we got here. As far as the public policy question, and I'm an introvert at heart. I love to study and I love to preach. And as far as being out front and vocal on issues, I really never saw myself in that light until I moved here. It's just like that was part of God's call and destiny on my life, was to come and to bring me out of my shell and to make me more prominent in public policy and matters. And so I've had multiple trips down to the Capitol, and each time I go, I think I'm the most nervous person there. You know, he said, well, you're a pastor, you're a leader in the community, and you speak before all these people, surely. I know, I've surely got nervous each time I did it, but there was such a peace and the power of the Holy Spirit comes over you when you just stand up. You know, I like what Nicole said. The rewards go to those who show up. And Woody Allen, the film producer, said 80% of success is showing up. And so just showing up with your voice and letting your voice be heard, not in a recalcitrant, bellicose, warlike way, but in a kind, compassionate way, standing for the truth. I sound like I'm preaching, so I'll be quiet. So that's us.
Hey, brother, we're in church. Come on. Well, and it's relevant to the question we're asking, if you will, or the topic of this panel, because it can lead people to believe if pastors, church leaders are not involved in public policy, if they don't go to the Capitol, or if they don't go to their city government or their school board or whatever, if they're not represented in some ways, that it doesn't matter, or that maybe people, they don't care. They'll just stay in their church and not be concerned with some of those things that happen. And so I'm at the Capitol and I'm in government, and so our team, we're in those spaces all the time. So we see the impact and how people can change when a pastor shows up. It's quite dynamic. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. Pastor Owens, you and I have been able to get to know each other for the past couple of years, and I've really enjoyed it. But you bring a whole lot more experience to the table when it comes to being active out in public than I do. And so we won't mention my birthday. We won't talk about birthdays up here, but there's no question. That is a compliment I'm trying to give you about the amount of work that you've done, the miles, the feet, whatever that you've walked. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got involved in issues related to the church and church ministry before you got involved in public policy.
I can tell you, I have a rich history. I'm 80 years old, happy as I can be, still working 12 hours a day. Let me tell you about my background. I was born, and until I was 8 years old, I lived in 2 rooms with 11 people, outside toilet, outside water. You took a bath in I believe it was size 8 tub, 10 tub, until I was 8 years old. But I was taught values by my mother, my grandmother, and my dad. And we were taught to work hard and to appreciate the freedom that we had. So we were so poor, the poor people called us poor. There go those poor Owens. We were that poor, but we were rich in values, and that made the difference. So my mother taught us to get an education. You must get an education. There was never a thought about not getting an education in our home. So we worked our way through college. 3 of us are university graduates from that poor background. And the reason 11 people lived in those 2 rooms, my mother's sister died, and she took in her children. That's how you do. That's what families do. So that gives you my background from childhood. I went off to college. Never doubted that I would go to college. Went off to college with $10. You know that God is with you. You'll do things. You walk by faith. And I was in the civil rights movement in Tennessee, Nashville, Tennessee, while I was in college. Tennessee State was the only school in the state that a black could go to, so that's where I went. And there, I was deeply involved in the civil rights movement. John Lewis was our leader there in Nashville. Dr. King came many times. I marched with Dr. King, looking for the freedom for my children that I didn't have. I wanted them to be able to get a good job, live a good life, work hard, and enjoy the American dream. That is my background. So I want you to know that I love America. We all came on different ships, but we're on the same ship now. And they're trying to take Christ out of this country. I've never seen anything like it before. And Christian friends, let me tell you something today. The church is where the black community was years ago. They're trying to destroy us. They admit that. They're trying to destroy the church. And I believe that God has blessed us to enjoy this day, and we should be a blessing to other people. And telling you a little about myself, I believe in God, and I'm a spiritual man. I believe God deals with us. I believe that. And when I was turning 50, things were upside down for me. I had lost my money, didn't have money. I was at the university and seminary, and I didn't know if I could go on. So I took a month off to go to my mother's house in Memphis and live with her, just the two of us, and prayed for the month that God would show me what to do with the rest of my life, because as it wasn't worth living. And on my birthday, December the 27th, 10 o'clock in the morning, 1988, the Lord spoke to me. Now I'm in school, in seminary. And God gave me a few things. Recruit students for the university, and recruit students that nobody else wants. I'll give you students everybody wants. Started that ministry with no money. Every weekend I would leave college, going to some city to tell students I recruit students, and I'll get you in. They didn't know nobody knew me at the university except my teachers. I had no money. I was sleeping in my car, and I dressed up and go to church like I slept in Trump Towers, and they didn't know that I was broke. But I did that every weekend. We started out with 3 students that January. We started out with 3 students. To make a long story short, those 3 students turned into 400 students. Wow. We gave away $2 million in scholarships because administration believed in me. I said, would you accept these students? The 3 students we recruited, not one of them qualified to get in a university. I said, would you take these students on probation, and I will mentor them myself. I'm an ex-school teacher. So they accepted that, and then opened the door for me to bring other students if I took responsibility. So those 3 students became 400 students. They're all over the country now. Doctors, lawyers, ministers, living great lives. One young lady became a millionaire. Excuse me. So with those 3 students, God told me this: recruit students that nobody else wants, and I'll give you students everybody wants.
Well, there's no doubt you allow people, and people have an opportunity to get an education if they take advantage of it.
That's right.
There's almost no limit of what they can do. So that's amazing what you've accomplished.
Yeah.
Pastor Forshee, you talked a little bit about your background, about your church leadership background, but also about coming out of your shell, I think, as you said that. I didn't know you had a shell, by the way. And so, because I seen this other pastor at the Capitol, and maybe it's me, maybe I keep pushing you in front of the microphone, and you're like, I'm not sure. But you seem to be a natural fit. We spent time together at the Capitol on the pastor protection law. We heard that talked about. And recently on the Save Chick-fil-A religious freedom bill. There you were, front and center with hundreds of us behind us on April 17th, after the city of San Antonio had banned Chick-fil-A from opening up a restaurant at the airport because of donations that they gave to religious and Christian ministries. It wasn't the first time that you've been to the Capitol, but I just want you to know that day and that hashtag trended worldwide that day. That is the biggest day on social media I think we have ever had, and you are front and center of that. What is it about that to you causes you to step aside from this concept of separation of church and state and step forward to do what's right?
Yeah. First of all, Bill, thank you, Pastor. Thank you for your story, and thank you for who you are and the man of God that you are. Great respect for you. Jonathan, when the word began to get out what was happening, in San Antonio, and that you guys, the Texas Values, were, gathering a group, and Jonathan invited me, would you come? And, some things you just don't have to pray about. Like, yes, I can come. And it kind of reminds me of the first time I was at the Capitol. It was a pro-life movement, and there were lots of orange shirts. I don't know if anybody was there that day. And we were very outnumbered, were we not, with our blue shirts. And we had brought about 20 people from our church here at Great Hills, and we soon were surrounded in a sea of orange in a pep rally for abortion. And after they were just going, and senators were coming up, and people were just rallying about the glories of abortion, my hand went up to speak. And I was looking at my hand going, what are you doing? Why are you raising your hand? And the lady called on me and said, would you like to say something? And I did. And it was just real quiet. And so I came up. And I had no idea what I was going to say. And my wife was with me and some other church members. As soon as I began to speak, they chanted, they hollered and screamed, and they shouted me down. They weren't going to let me speak. But I was ready. I was willing. And afterward, we had opportunity to really engage in dialogue and debate with some of those people, which was really cool. And so, likewise, fast forward a few years, just a few months ago, when we go to the Capitol and Jonathan, I appreciate him. I respect him and his boldness. He is fearless, has great courage. And so I step up to the mic, and it's one of those moments again where, Lord, give me the words to say. And so we did, and we just, this whole separation of church and state, that's a really interesting thing, and it is such it's been so misconstrued and twisted. When you look at the genesis of that, and I've been studying this with Thomas Jefferson. He's the one who coined that phrase in a letter to a bunch of Baptists in Connecticut, Danbury Baptist in 1796 or somewhere in there. And no, it was 1802, and he was championing the First Amendment that the Congress, with the government, would not establish any laws prohibiting the free exercise thereof of religion. And he coined this phrase, therefore, a great wall of separation has been established between church and state. And the context is, this is a good thing to protect you, the church. It was never meant to protect the state from the influence of the church. And so people have misconstrued that and say, oh, separation church and state. That's the history of that. And so we have history on our side, we have truth on our side. And when you take a stand for biblical morality, things like marriage between one man and one woman for one life, that the life is sacred from the womb to the tomb, right? And that religious liberty. And so, Jonathan, when these issues come up, and this last one, this religious liberty, and I think you phrased it to me that, as businessmen, Christian businessmen and women are being attacked and your liberties are being removed, it would be only a matter of time before that encroachment comes upon the church. And so I want to live my life with a motto of no regrets. And so I wanted to show up, and just amazing things happen when the people of God rally around the Word of God with the Spirit of God and with the courage of God, and you stand up and you speak, and again, not in an angry, and I think that's sometimes we hurt ourselves in our cause. We get real red-faced, we start shouting and screaming, but just look at Jesus, the King, and how masterful he was in the way he spoke truth in what? You remember that? Truth in love. And so that's my goal. And so anyhow, Jonathan, that's my answer to it.
Well, you're doing a great job at that Christian witness at the Capitol. And I've had those moments too, where I walk up to a podium or microphone and I forgot to think about what I was going to say. And so it's always good to say a quick prayer and think about what you're going to say. But he's there one way or another, and it's that courage of coming forward, of being there and knowing the right words will be given to you. I will tell you, gentlemen, I have seen pastors have such an impact at the Capitol on elected officials. I was there one day, I remember, and there was a member of the legislature that was weeping as he was praying with a pastor just outside the House chamber. And I've had several members of the legislature tell me that no one really gets their attention or commands some of that respect that a pastor does. I know, speaking of the Save Chick-fil-A Religious Freedom Bill, we've got Candy Noble was here with the pledges, Senator Pete Flores. I remember discussions on the House, and I believe it actually may have been on the Senate floor, where it was suggested that the government should punish people that give money to churches that have certain biblical beliefs, which is now protected in state law with the Save Chick-fil-A Religious Freedom Bill. So that really is just more of the reason why it's necessary for the church and church leaders to be there, because your rights are right there in the balance. And there are some members of the legislature that think that it's okay for the government to punish on those issues. Reverend Owens, I'm sure you've heard of the phrase separation of church and state in that concept. And some people could think your presence at a legislative body, whatever, is somehow going against that if they believe in it. Tell us about what your view is on that concept and why it's important for people of faith to push back against that narrative.
If the people of faith do not stand up, we're going to lose our rights. It was the church, the black church, that led the civil rights movement. All of the goodness in people's heart made that movement successful. I'm afraid now, when I see what is happening to the black community, that the left has taken this thing and their efforts to destroy everything accomplished in the civil rights movement and move it over to gay rights. I said I didn't march 1 foot, 1 yard, 1 mile for a man to marry a man. You see, I knew before President Obama came out of the closet, I knew he was for gay rights. But he made a deal: if I do it in my first election, I won't get the black vote. So he said, I'll take it up in the second election. Well, I already knew it, so he came out 1 week for gay rights, same-sex marriage. The very next week, I had a news conference denouncing it. And as a result of that news conference, we have now 307,000 people on our list.
Wow.
307,000 people, because we stood up. If the church does not stand up, we're lost. For your children, for your grandchildren. I said for my grandchildren, but now for my children, 5 and 6 years old. We must stand up. How many of you want your son to come home with a man and say, we get married? How many of you want your daughters to come home and say, we're marrying a lady? Unbelievable. Everything ungodly. If we let them get away with it, the church is more relevant than ever. And I said this: more black people should be in this audience today. More black people should be in this. My wife and I hired a maid last week. 30 years old, full of energy. It takes a lot of energy to run my house. And she was good. But do you know her husband made her quit because I worked with President Trump? Made her quit. She just didn't show up. We tried to contact her 4 or 5 days later. She texted us and told us that her husband would not allow her to work for us because I support the president, because I was in the White House. I do support the president. And we should be evangelists for people of all colors.
Amen.
I just moved to Texas, starting in March, still moving. Because we have more people on our list in Texas than any other state. We have more supporters, partners in Texas. I will try to make a difference. Now, when I was on Don Lemon a few weeks ago and Fox News, the threats that my wife and I got, you wouldn't believe it. The threats are unbelievable. We have to have the police to guard our house. But I will stand up. God has blessed me to get a good age with a good life. I will spend the rest of my life trying to bring races together, trying to educate black people. That my wife and I got in the Republican Party really because of school choice. We studied it. We didn't know all the issues. But I said, they're trying to help poor children. That's how we got in the Republic. So we have to give the black community a need to join us in this fight. And the church must be relevant. It must stand up for godly principles.
Amen. And that reminds me, if you hear something interesting that you want to share with your friends on social media, the hashtag is TXValues19. We welcome that. We encourage you to do that because you're going to hear a lot of interesting and thought-provoking things over the next day and a half. Last round of questions, if you will, and just more of a brief answer, but if you think about it, because we hear this sometimes, and I'm not a pastor, but we work with a lot of church leaders, and we'll hear hesitation, we'll hear concern. Reverend Owens, what would you say to a pastor or church leader if you talk to them about these issues and they're hesitant about getting into public policy?
One thing I've done, there's some flyers out there. I wrote a book called A Dream Derailed, The Dream for Black America, and we're in worse shape than most groups in the country now. After the Civil Rights Movement, what I did not know until December of 2015, President Johnson was one of my heroes. I didn't know that he said, give a Negro a little bit. He didn't use the word Negro. And you'll have a Democrat for 200 years. What they did, they had 100,000, that's in this book, if you want to get it. There's a form for it. They had 100,000 federal social workers to go throughout America to convince black mothers who were present, black mothers with children, to put the father out of the home and get on welfare. I didn't know that. It's documented. They did that. President Johnson was one of my heroes. I didn't know that was the other side of his story until I studied it. 100,000 social, to just go talk to black women and get them to put the father out the home and put them on welfare. And that's the reason so many black people on welfare now. When you talk about electing a president, most women, black women say, well, he's going to take away my what? He's going to take away my check. I don't depend on a check from anybody except I earn it. So does that answer the question?
That's a great, and that's an answer because that's your experience of what you come across and what matters. And that also is a reminder of how valuable information is, particularly historical information from a president who did things at that time that also negatively impacted religious freedom. Pastor Forshee, we talked a little bit about some of the work that you and I have done. Reverend Owens, you were very involved in things in Houston and other work and movement to support traditional marriage, to support issues of privacy, pro-life. Pastor Forshee, I imagine you've come across people at times, maybe you even had the thought, maybe a few years ago before we started inviting you a lot, but this idea of getting involved in public policy and pastors. What would you tell people, a Christian or a church leader, if they're hesitant about getting involved in public policy?
Yeah, I would encourage them as they pray, because we're people of prayer and we're praying for our nation. And as you pray and you read the Word of God, you come across verses like the great Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5:13 through 16, where Jesus said, you're the salt of the earth, right? And you're the light of the world. And a verse that really means a lot to me that kind of brings me out of my shell is that, I think it's verse 15, where it says, you don't take a light and put it under a bushel. You don't take the light and take it off the table, but you put the light on the stand so that it can be conspicuous, so that it can be seen and dispel, the darkness. But I get it, Jonathan. I get the pressures and the time constraints on pastors. Nobody does this unless you're called to do it. There's always something to do, and we do it because we love the Lord, we love our people, and you can push things to the max and to the margins and say, and a lot of guys say, I just don't have time. I just don't have time taking care of my church, taking care of my family, and so forth. But, I would just encourage those guys to pray, and as they read the Word, to really just step out. And what they'll find is there's a lot of joy and there's a lot of excitement in doing this and getting up and speaking out. There's a verse in the Bible that says, where there is no prophetic revelation, the people cast off restraint. Happy is he who keeps the law. That's Proverbs 29:18. And so I encourage guys, not only in precept and teaching, but also with example as you go. And another thing that I think it encourages and somewhat galvanizes our people, when our people at Great Hills, and I don't do this for this reason, that they might see me on one of these clips or might see me down at the Capitol. I don't do that to be seen, but as word gets out that, hey, our pastor is really trying to take a stand for what we believe in, then I think it rallies them. I think it encourages them. They say, well, our pastor, he's willing to do that, so why aren't we willing to, to stand up? And I just don't want it on my watch that our freedoms were taken away on our watch. I don't want that. I want to stand, so thank you.
Well, and, look, that one day you were there, the Save Chick-fil-A Day on April 17th, I mentioned about the impact we had on social media that day, trending worldwide, likely the most impact and stats and numbers that we've ever had on one day on social media. But it also was a day where there was a hearing on several pieces of legislation. And I have to tell you, I don't remember exactly what the timing was, but I think we made the decision to have that rally, if you will, and press conference maybe 36 or 24 hours before we did it. And that's what happens sometimes. You try to, almost thread the needle. But I just also want you to know, and Reverend Owens too, when we make that call, we try to wait until it's like maybe that 1 or 2 days where your impact can be made even more. And particularly with you being located here in Austin, it's such a resource and it's so encouraging. But every now and then you have those days. And that hearing on several pieces of religious liberty legislation, and some that were trying to take away those rights, bills that were bad bills, we called them ban the Bible bills. The hearing went on until 7:30, I think, the next morning. And so sometimes you get those days and you pray for that everything comes together and you can make an impact. And you come over to one day, that's all it can take sometimes to make that tremendous impact. And Reverend Owens, I know some of the things you've been involved in too, where those moments that particularly on the national news networks, where nowadays you get 15, 30 seconds maybe of a soundbite, but it can make a tremendous impact. So I just want to encourage both of you gentlemen and your families, if they're here. Did your wife make it? What time did you say she's coming?
Yeah, she's standing in the
Where
back
is she?
there. So she's in the very back. She's waving at us. So,
Thank you.
Jonathan, I will say one thing about that I don't think I've shared with you this, and I hesitate to share this because I don't want to be misunderstood. But what I haven't told you is throughout that day, I was texting Dan Cathy. He was watching online, and he was saying, "Keep me posted, keep me posted."
Wow!
And so I don't think I've even told you this yet. So, and it's a strange sort of set of circumstances how I even got to know him and got his text. I got his phone number, but anyhow, he was asking, "What's coming up next? What's happening?" So, isn't it amazing how when God asks you to do something and you do it, He uses you in ways you don't even realize.
Well, and before we skip forward on that, just if you'll let the audience, in case some people may not know who Dan Cathy is.
Well, he's the CEO of Chick-fil-A. Yeah. He runs Chick-fil-A.
So that's who was communicating with you on the day we were having our Save Chick-fil-A Religious Freedom Rally. That's quite impressive. I think that's a great point for us to end this panel and give both of our panelists, Reverend Bill Owens, Pastor Danny Forshee, a wonderful round of applause. Thank you so much for your participation.
Jonathan, could I say one more thing? I think it's very important. What the left has done, they've taken a civil rights movement and directed it to gay rights. Blacks in America are suffering today. They don't care about them. They've taken it all about homosexuality. Just be aware of that.
And we'll have more information about that in the next day and a half on the sexuality issues. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.